everyone. Welcome to another edition of Upbuild Conversation. We're excited to be back together. I'm excited to be back with both of you. It's been a few weeks, and we are just coming out of the holidays. And Hari, you are just coming out of your annual retreat of solitude. And we really wanted to explore your experience over the last couple of weeks and generally the benefits of taking time off. You've written about this, and not just taking time off of work, but taking time to really be with yourself and only with yourself. Hari Prasad, tell us, how was your experience over the last 2 weeks?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. I'm also excited to be exploring this subject with you guys. And I was sharing that I don't even know what I would want to be able to offer from the last couple of weeks. And I think there'll be a lot of discovery here for me. It's so important to anchor the learnings more. And this discussion is a wonderful opportunity, and to get your perspectives and experiences is invaluable. So thank you. It was amazing. I mean, it wasn't like the first time that I did it last year, where I experienced a lot of exuberance the first time. It was like a totally brand new, exciting experience. It was this open canvas that I had never had before, that I could paint anything I wanted onto it. And I was feeling so much energy and inspiration and like guidance from within, direction, clarity, what I want to offer with the year and the habits that I want to have, and being steeped in my spiritual practices. It was not easy. It was very difficult, but it was extremely rewarding and palpably so. And then I also tried to make it a recurring theme, that I have some touch points, some opportunities to recharge throughout the year, to keep that spirit going when I'm running myself dry. So I did that over the course of the year. It was also not easy. But this kind of launch pad of a couple of weeks, this is only the second time that I'm doing it for such an extended period and with such an intentionality going into the new year. And I found it was vastly different. It was, I could say, much more trying, that I was really, I was experiencing a lot of struggle to immerse myself in my practices and to feel, and this is, goes back to the reflection that I wrote at the end of the year in the conversation that we had, Vipin, around the takeaway for 2020 and letting go of the results. I found that I really had to let go of the desire to control my outcome of the retreat. That I couldn't go in with like, well, I want it to be like it was last time and even better. I had to go in with whatever is meant to happen is going to happen. And it was very beneficial. It was amazing in that way, to get closer to that realization of, I don't get to control. Even when I've laid out these 2 weeks, so many things came up that were absolutely out of my control. And I had to bite the bullet and accept that, and think like, this is the 2 weeks that I carved out, and it's not going the way that, like, this is the only time that I have that much control, and it's not going according to my plan. So many times that was happening, and so intensely, even recognizing that I couldn't be in solitude all the time, because there were other needs and other people to serve that had timeliness to it. But I learned a lot, and stepping back, that the main thing I would say overarchingly is being able to step back and evaluate my life, not being in the daily, I hate to say it, but grind, when our consciousness gets dull and it's just, okay, here we go. This is what it is, another day. To step out of that and to set up a space for exploration. And again, for me, the spiritual immersion was critical because that's where I get a sense of where I'm at, where I want to go, and what are the directions, what are the inner directives that are coming to me. And I made the priority of doing a lot of writing and a lot of unpacking these things. So for me, having that time to step outside of the daily routine, get absorbed in my spiritual practices and write about what are my realizations, what are my learnings, what do I need to do to bring my life more into the sphere that I know it's meant to be. That was super powerful.
I was going to ask you to share what your intention was going in, because you talked about bringing a lot of intentionality, but I think you shared that here at the end. Is there anything else you'd say about what intentions you had going into this time?
Well, I knew that I wanted to sort of maximize my consciousness of a reality beyond the everyday, that there is something more than our senses can perceive. And I wanted to do my best to tap into that. And so doing meditation for an entire day, increasing my meditation practice every day, and sometimes very, very substantially. And getting a lot of reading of sacred texts. That was, I would say, foundational as an intention, so that I could tap into reality beyond the one that is constantly bombarding us. You know, all of the information, all of the messages, all of the, I have to do this, I have to do this, I need to do this. Now I want to do this because my mind is telling me, my senses are telling me, I'm getting urges, I should do this, I need to do this, I want to do this. To get out of that and to get into a space of what is there beyond all this? What is there for the soul? Where is the nourishment of the soul? That was the primary intention.
So I have a question I'm desperate to ask here is, I mean, for context, you devote at least 3 hours a day, every day, to your meditation practices and your reading, and for this exact purpose. So, and you still feel like this time where you expand that much further, it allows you to get in touch with a different reality. And I'm just thinking, what does that look like for the rest of us who, can barely find 10 or 20 minutes to be with ourselves or to have our meditation practices, our spiritual practices? Even with 3 to 4 hours of that daily, you feel still bombarded by the senses and the needs and the action items. So what hope do the rest of us have?
That's a great question. I think it's all relative, you know. The main thing is we don't want to plateau. So if you are doing no meditation, no like raising of your consciousness, no getting in touch with yourself, no understanding of the spiritual reality, to do a little something in that direction will go a long way. It will disrupt the patterns of the mind. It will disrupt our whole way of being to a small but noticeable degree. And that is huge. In fact, in some ways, the effects are bigger at that point. For me, having gone at this for 14 years, it's harder to see the effects. And the whole thing is, I don't want to become stagnant. I always want to be moving forward. I need to be moving forward. I need to be increasing my consciousness and becoming more of who I really am.
So one of the things that came up while you were talking was the difference between actually making something, and Vipin, you called this out in your intro, the difference between actually making time away from these things and a real experience of solitude. You might get some time off from work and you might actually physically be by yourself. And a lot of people, when they're thinking about going for some solitude, those are the two things that they set up. Okay, I'm going to take time off from work and I'm going to physically be by myself. And this is spoken from personal experience. Okay, so I got to this blank room, nobody's bothering me, but still it feels so uncomfortable that I don't really have that genuine experience of solitude, because I figure out a way to make myself a little bit more comfortable, which numbs out the actual solitude.
I couldn't agree more. Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think most people don't necessarily even get to that point of solitude. It's like, if I'm alone with, you know, my TV and messages and this and that. It's hard to experience solitude that way.
And so what would you say, you mentioned some practices, meditation, writing is, you know, super helpful for, especially for people who might not be meditation practitioners. What would you say is kind of like the core essence of solitude? Because what we've already come to the conclusion that just being alone is not enough.
Yeah. It's important to think about, what does it really mean to be in solitude? You know, from my vantage point, it is about removing the noise, removing the coverings to our being. And from, you know, Upbuild's understanding, it is about getting as far away from the ego as possible, and therefore to be able to see the ego so that it doesn't run us, and to you know, sometimes just leave it for a day completely. Don't go there, but be who we actually are, which is the self, is the soul, a spiritual being, someone who is not limited by all of this phenomena and all of the constraints of our existence.
I'm also thinking, how does one experience that? Because even that sounds, it's so vast and so distant from our experience of daily life in the material world. How, even sitting for 10 minutes, I mean, how do you get a taste of that propels you to go further?
Well, I would love to ask both of you that, because I know you have some experience, and I know that on this path, we wouldn't all be here together if we didn't have that common bond, that calling, that call to awaken, if you will, that is pulling us forward. So, what would you say?
Well, I had a experience this past summer where I spent 4 days at a retreat center in the mountains of Japan, and it was a beautiful place from a aesthetic perspective. It was, you know, set in the mountains, kind of foggy clouds, beautiful trees, kind of damp forest to walk through. And as part of that program, there were actually daily silent walks that we did through various forests. And I found that to be, and they were silent walks. So it was, you know, we were quite spaced out from one another. There was only 4 of us, but there was significant distance between each of us. And, you know, nobody was allowed to communicate. And there was something about being in that natural environment with kind of the sounds of the river and the bugs and animals kind of doing their natural thing, which gave me this sense of peace and gave me this sense of, I'm closer to my real self. I might not be exactly there, but that was really helpful, to be in a different environment, in silence, and also being in motion a little bit. I think that got me out of my own head.
Yes, and that's in absolute contrast to my own retreat, which was here in New York City, in Long Island City, at my home, in quarantine. Didn't leave. The only nature that I saw was from my balcony, where there's not really nature, but a lot of buildings. And I mean, there are trees also. But yeah, that is in some ways a much more natural way of being, and so it can get us in touch with ourselves. You know, nature is called nature for a reason. It's natural, and I think in some ways I'm envious that when I've gotten to experience things like that, it's been really wonderful to get us to another level of consciousness, a more creative consciousness, or from the Bhagavad Gita standpoint, the mode of goodness. These modes of material nature are energies that are constantly influencing us. And there's ignorance, passion, goodness. Ignorance is pulling us down. Passion is driving us to get things that we want. Our egos feeling fulfilled or unfulfilled and determined to get what we want. And then goodness is when we're actually peaceful and we can think clearly and be with ourselves instead of just constantly wanting and being in want. So when you go to a place that has the energy of goodness, like nature, you get closer to the self. You get a little bit less restless ego stuff. But, you know, for me, I also found in my environment, and I was sharing this with Vipin yesterday, to have a controlled environment also shows you where you're at. And especially when you absorb yourself in spiritual practices, it will be confronting because you will see, oh my God, I'm not very spiritual. I've been practicing for 14 years. I've been doing everything I'm supposed to be doing. And this is where I'm at. I have a long ways to go. The journey is a long one. With a controlled environment, it becomes more acutely perceptible that I see, wow, when there's no noise, when I'm just sitting in my apartment doing my meditation all day long, here I am. My ego is still running wild. It's still wanting so much. It's still so restless. And now there's nothing I can distract myself from hearing about it. Like its cries are louder. It has my full attention.
I also think we need to be, and I'll kind of backtrack on, not backtrack, but just kind of put a asterisk next to what I said, because I think we also need to be a little bit careful about fantasizing too much about being, going on these trips or kind of being in these pristine environments, and that being the key that will unlock this for all of us. There's a book by Alain de Botton, I think his name is. He wrote a book called The Art of Travel, and in the book he talks about like the whole process of signing up for a trip, where we look at the brochure and we see the hotel, and we see pictures of the beach that we're going to go to, and we see this beautiful buffet that we know we're going to have unlimited food, and so then we call and make a reservation, we get on our plane, and we just have this amazing fantasy about what we're going to feel when we get there. And then we get there and actually we don't really feel that different. We might be at that same buffet that we saw, we might be on the beach. And he says we made one huge mistake when we signed up for this trip, and that's that we brought ourselves on the trip, that we ourselves came on the trip. And so the whole ego that we had when we were at home, it's actually still here. And so really dealing with that rather than the environment itself is actually the critical thing.
Absolutely. I mean, I couldn't agree more. Yeah, Vipin, what about your experience?
I have so many thoughts that are coming up
Please.
as you guys have shared. I was thinking about when Michael, you were talking about your experience at the retreat, I was like thrown back to when I was first year in college. We did this outdoor program the first week, and we were up in Maine on the Appalachian Trail. And on the last day, there were 12 of us in the groups. On the last day, they allowed us or encouraged us to hike at 10 or 20-minute intervals. So we were all alone in the woods as we went, because for 7 days we were all together. And so on our walk out, we were able to do it in solitude. And that was, I was thinking as you were talking, Michael, about why is nature so helpful when we think about reconnecting with ourselves. And I'd also received a message from someone yesterday that is struggling with a lot of loss. And she was talking about how the time that she spent in nature over the last few months has been so healing for her. And I didn't really have an answer for that, except it does help you. It helps me always see the vastness of the world and how small I am in relative. And I think that's helpful when you think about, and it is calming when you think about, otherwise day to day, it's like myself feels so big, and therefore all these things that I have to do and fix, and all of a sudden there's an ease when it's like, oh, I'm so small and the world is so vast. And so why am I so occupied with myself? I don't need to be.
Carrying the weight of the world on our shoulders when the world is so much bigger and not dependent on us.
Yeah. So that was the thread I had. The other thing I was thinking about was I was remembering my first time sitting in meditation. It was probably about 15 years ago. I mean, I've sat for other, like religious ritual, like programs, mantras, but I think like just sitting down myself in mindfulness, I remember thinking, what am I going to do for 10 minutes? Like that seems like a really long time, and uncomfortably so. And how that changes, like now I'm so much looking forward to those 10 minutes and seeing what emerges. And it reminds me, Hari, you were saying earlier, like, depending on what your experience is, how do you keep pushing the edge of that? This is a weird analog, but the company that I had been part of prior to Upbuild, we went through a program called Techstars. And I remember talking to another founder in that program who had been running his company for 4 or 5 years. And we were a company that had, our first day as a company was our first day in the program. So we were complete novices. And, everyone in they were talking about how much progress needs to be made over these 3 months so that you can raise capital and really get going. And I remember feeling like, we have nothing. Like, what are we going to have to show for in 3 months? And he said something really interesting to me. He said, we've been operating for 5 years. So in 3 months, like, it's going to be pretty incremental what we can do here. But you are starting from a completely blank slate. In 3 months, you're going to look like a completely transformed entity. And that really, stuck with me. And I was thinking that it relates to what you're saying, Hari Prasad, about, 14 years of this. It takes more to like move the needle. But for someone who is much earlier in their journey of those practices, a little bit can go a really long way. And I've really experienced that.
It's beautiful. And I realize now we're in 2021. My God, I'm in my 15th year here, going on that 15th year. I also, to that question of what is needed to remove all the noise and to actually be with ourselves truly. I know my own conviction is that we need guidance, that if it's up to our minds, and often we hear the term monkey minds in like Buddhist and yoga traditions, it's not really the best arrangement for growth. Listening to the dictates of my mind, which is the servant of my ego, probably not the way to go. In the Bhagavad Gita, there's this verse which is very poignant that says, your mind can be your best friend or your worst enemy. And it's really up to us which one it's going to be. But don't think it's easy to make your worst enemy your best friend. Have you ever found that it was easy to convert your worst enemy, I mean really worst enemy, into your best friend? In fact, it was so funny. My fitness trainer was quoting the Bhagavad Gita without even knowing it. He basically said that verse and he was like, oh, I didn't even know. But it's so important to recognize what we're dealing with, that the mind, the reason meditation is so important, and certain meditation teachers will say it's mental hygiene, is because the mind is unclean. It is not our friend right now. And it is a long road to make it our friend, but it is the best journey. And I don't want it to be discouraging for people because it's long and we want instant gratification and it's hard. Because the thing is, it's much harder to not make the mind your friend, to live with your worst enemy and being its servant, its slave, really. And not knowing what there is beyond, not really experiencing self-control, the control of the self, but always being under the dictates of what does my ego want, and feeling that uncomfortable selfishness all the time that I try to run away from and I try to cover up with doing acts of kindness and charity and things, but knowing that at the end of the day, it's really, it's my, I'm the star of my show, and I want it to be the best show in town. To get out of that, that's the prison. And every little thing we do to start to break free from that prison is huge. And it is so refreshing. And just to know, to have faith, to experience that is not all there is, whew, unbelievable. So, but for that, we can't follow this thing. We need guidance. And that guidance comes in many different ways. But it's the reason why the term meditation teacher exists, right? You cannot do it all on your own. You cannot school yourself in everything. Even if you're, doing the YouTube thing or reading a book, somebody wrote that book, somebody made that video. We're always learning from other people. And we have to get into that mindset, that humility, that receiver state. Recognize I am limited. I need help to control my mind and to get in touch with myself and to submit myself to learning in that humble spirit. And in the Eastern traditions, it's always said that knowledge flows downward, that when we put ourselves humbly as receivers, then knowledge can flow into us. But as long as we're trying to be awesome and we think we're great and I can do it, we don't ever get outside of our own limits. We always remain within our limits. So to really experience this kind of actual solitude, it requires guidance and practice that will get us outside of ourselves and our way of being.
I think, Hari, I was telling you a little bit about this yesterday when we were talking. I recognize for myself, the past few years, I've been really trying to be more consistent about my own meditation practices. And I've found it to be elusive, it's very difficult for me because I was sharing with you that I'm not setting an unreasonable goal. And I feel like, well, I should be able to do this. I should be able to carve out time and prioritize this if it's that important to me. And then, but I've been such a pendulum around, there's, you know, a few months where I'm highly consistent and then I fall off, and then it takes me a while to get back. And one of the things that I'm noticing, not just with meditation, but in other aspects of my life, there's my trials and tribulations, and then there's the other side, like where is something happening outside of my efforts, what grace is being given. And I had this experience this, you know, at the turn of the year here, where something I've been working at, and it's been confusing to see why I haven't been able to find a consistent practice, but I haven't given up. And something switched for me, you know, in this new year, where it felt all of a sudden more clear that I'm going to be able to do this now. And I can't quite explain like where that is coming from, but what I'm trying to say is that it can be easy also to give up. Like it's not working and I'm not getting the benefit, or I'm not getting the taste of what I want. And so maybe this is not right for me. Maybe it's not what it's cracked up to be. And I think something about staying in the fight and open to receiving when, you know, not on my timeline, but on someone else's.
I love that. And Hari, you had said something earlier on when you were talking about your intention for your retreat, and you know, thinking about what can you offer through this retreat and for the rest of the year. And that's such a helpful framing versus, I think, the standard way of looking at solitude or meditation or or a retreat in general would be like, what am I going to get out of this? And so now it's like now every day it's like a real risk reward calculation. It's a real what are the positives for me and what are the negatives, and are the positives higher than the negatives? And if we're so strict in this calculation, and it's very selfish in how we're thinking about it, it is easy to give up, because the positives might not, when we're thinking just of ourselves, the positives might not always outweigh what we could be doing with our time or some of the discomfort that we're feeling. But when we're thinking, and Vipin, when you were talking, this came to my head, what if I sat down for every meditation and thought, like, who will this benefit by me having this time in solitude, and then maybe being able to respond from a kinder place later on in the day, or feeling a little bit more well rested or nourished? Like, actually, this is an obligation that I have to do so that I can prepare myself for, you know, being a servant for other people.
It's huge. I mean, this is how I deal with the guilt of taking time off from my responsibilities. It's exactly that, well, if I don't do it, I'm failing to serve the people that I care about most. I'm failing to serve my wife, my team, this Upbuild community, and all of the people in my life, my family, my loved ones, friends. It's just, I'm not doing justice, because everything I do stems from who I am. I mean, I cannot get this out of my head. It's always my thought is that I have to be the person that I'm meant to be if I want to do the things that I feel driven to do. And if I want to really make the most of this life, it requires a way of being that is different. And if I don't explore that, and I don't go beyond my borders, then I'm not just making myself suffer. I won't even know really what is the suffering for me, because I never tried anything else. I never experienced anything else. But I'm making everybody else suffer because, as you said, I'm not responding from the place of the real self. And granted, I mean, I'm still not often responding from the place of the real self, but I know I'm getting closer. And that's the whole thing, getting closer and closer and closer and experiencing that proximity and experiencing the increase of that proximity. And Vipin, as you were saying, this is the long haul. Like, this is not stay in the fight is so appropriate. The Bhagavad Gita takes place on a battlefield. It is not easy to fight a war. And Krishna is instructing Arjuna. He's training him in self-realization. He's helping him to make his mind his best friend and plug it into his real self, for the mind to actually be connected to the self and only be the servant of the self, not the ego, so that he experiences fully who he is, and everything comes from there. And in that, Krishna's telling him, and do it while you're fighting the battle. And Arjuna's thinking, that's nuts. If I'm killing people, if I'm in a war, if my life is at stake all the time, you want me to be a yogi? I need to go into the forest. Like, I can't do this without being in nature, like being on a battlefield. And for 18 chapters, Krishna's trying to help him understand it's not about where you are. It's about your consciousness. It's not about what you're doing. It's about your consciousness. And when your consciousness is in a certain state, you will be able to do anything in the most beautiful, graceful, loving, beneficial way. Even fighting a war, you will be serving so many people by establishing justice, and you will only be thinking of their well-being. You won't even see them as your enemies. And his entire consciousness shifts, and it's inconceivable. And it takes time, and it takes battle within himself and without. And at the beginning, he wants to give up. He says, Krishna, I will not fight. I'm not going to do my duty. I am not going to protect the citizens in spite of the danger. There was clear and present danger from the tyrannical Kaurava army. And he said, I'm not going to do it. And then Krishna says, well, look, if you really want my help, because he's asking for help, then understand that this is not going to be easy, but it is going to be worth it. And it's going to be everything that you've ever dreamed of and more. And it starts now.
I have this, I feel like maybe we should, that's like a nice, that's like some nice closure to this discussion. I also feel that we've been talking for a while about the experiences of solitude and meditation. And I was wondering if it would, we know about how you spend your time on retreat, but for the benefit of others, is it helpful to get more concrete, more specific about that, so that it doesn't feel like this black box of like, going in, spending time in meditation and coming out, at the end, a transformed person? I don't know if that would be beneficial.
Sure. I mean, anything that you guys would want to share on this, like based on what you've either seen or experienced yourself, and then I can also fill in. I mean, you know a lot about what I do, and you also have your own approaches.
I'd be happy to hear from you. I have my 30-minute little morning ritual, but I think
that's wonderful, though. That's so good. I want to hear more about it.
Well, it's top of mind because I just put out my 2021 life optimization email, and so every year there's whatever my kind of morning ritual of the month is, which seems to change quite a bit. But for me, it's it's, I have a little mini altar here, actually right beside me. And it just starts with, you know, like 3 minutes or so of just getting centered, having my hands in prayer position, and saying any prayers for people, or wishing people well who are in my life or who might be struggling. And that could include myself if I'm dealing with something particularly difficult or challenging, or my ego is being particularly present, then I'll ask for some sort of grace and help with that. And then I'll go into some breathing exercises. I like the Wim Hof method. It's kind of a vigorous breathing practice, but usually that's what's required for me to, you know, get really centered and kind of get into my body, which can actually be one of the best ways to also see that we're not bodies and that we're not minds. But first we have to get into the body. And so that sort of vigorous breathing practice is very helpful. So that will be about 5 to 7 minutes or so. And then I'll do a little bit of chanting, which I also find to be a great way, since it's also a little bit vigorous and I'm actually chanting out loud rather than just silently to myself, as a good way to both get into my body and to connect to something that feels divine and you know, much larger than me. And then usually I'll just sit for about 15 minutes or so in kind of a more of a classic Zen Buddhist type of meditation, where it's just you know, in silence, kind of trying to see my thoughts as just thoughts or kind of clouds passing in the sky. And when I have a thought, not judging that thought, coming back to my breath, or you know, coming back to a clear mind, and just repeating that process over and over again, and understanding that it's can be messy and frustrating at times, but that's okay. And that's 30 minutes.
Super inspiring. Wow. Vipin, please share.
Yeah, I think I like to, when I'm doing some breath work or just body scan, at the end of that, just watch with alertness what thought is going to creep in next, like almost at the edge of my seat, waiting, just trying to observe, like me, my body and my mind is separate from myself. And I think I read something in Satchidananda Swami's book about, with regard to mantra meditation, and you know, just listening to oneself sincerely chanting the Maha Mantra. I was thinking, sometimes when I listen in that way, it feels like I'm listening to this body chanting, and I'm almost looking at, like, what a sincere living entity, what a sincere soul that is chanting. And then it's like, well, who's listening, who's watching? And it's a helpful experience of separation in both of those cases. But yeah, my practice is to just try to spend 10 minutes in mindful meditation, in silence, and then in chanting for 10 to 15 minutes.
So beautiful. I'm getting energy hearing about your practices. It's making me want to get into mine. It's actually so helpful to discuss these things and to inspire each other. Not that we don't do that, but sometimes new things come out. And even when just the spirit of being in that space and speaking about it and sharing experiences, it really strengthens our practice. In fact, I remember as a brahmachari or as a monk, I remember, we were all doing meditation together for a great amount of time every day. And one of the senior monks had brought up, I think it was actually the head of our monastery, he had brought up that we never talk about it. We spend all this time every day as like the core, it's like the main course of our spiritual practice, doing this mantra meditation. And we all do it together and we never talk about it. How strange. And he was encouraging us to speak about it. What's it been like? What are you struggling with? What are some of the realizations you've had? What positive experiences have cropped up, if any? And, I made it a point, and I found even when I made it a point, it was difficult to actually prioritize doing that. And every time I did, it was strengthening. I was getting the feeling like, yeah, I want to do more. Just talking about it would make me want to do more. And for my own practice presently, well, it's obviously very different on retreat. But, daily, I as Vipin, you had pointed out, I'll do a bit over 2 hours of mantra meditation each day. I love to do it first thing in the morning, all in one stretch, uninterrupted, but doesn't always turn out that way. I'm trying my best. Sometimes it's the last thing I do before I go to bed, and it's much more strenuous that way. Not that it's easy in the morning, but it's just, it's less like trying to get it done and better consciousness. Even when I'm seeing my own struggles and difficulties, it's a better way of confronting them than like, okay, I got to go to sleep, but I have this commitment that is going to be uplifting for me if I make good on it. So I have over 2 hours of mantra meditation. I do a lot of prayers. I love to offer some incense, also have an altar here, and read sacred texts, as I alluded to earlier, to really steep myself in understanding what is the spiritual reality, what is the material reality, what is the relationship between the two, what's the you are here point, what's the journey, what's it going to require of me, what are some inspired teachings from people who've walked this path, what are their experiences, what connects with me right now on my path that I'm receiving from them. It's again that metaphor of the stream, that the knowledge flows downward, just like a waterfall. And so I want to catch that. And the Buddhists also say, if your cup is full, what will you receive? So I want to empty my cup. I go into my reading and I ask for, I ask to be spoken to. I ask that when I read, that the author and that the great saints will communicate to me their message, their realizations. And I love to make notes on what it is that I'm receiving to further anchor it and grapple with what are my struggles in understanding this? What are my struggles in general? And how can I process them in the light of what I'm reading? And what am I learning? What's new? So yeah, that's very inspiring. And I just increase all of that when I'm on retreat. I do it a lot more. And I have, I do verse recitations that are beautiful from like the Bhagavad Gita or other sacred texts. Yeah, there are so many inspired approaches. There's no one way. I also do breathing practices like pranayamas for those who know the yoga path. That I find to be also very nice. Yeah, there's a lot. And it can be customized. It can be tailored. It should be to where we're at.
I was remembering, when you were talking about Krishna and Arjuna on the battlefield, and the whole point for 18 chapters is like, it's not about what you're doing, it's about the consciousness that you're bringing to it. and I had this, as you finished, I couldn't remember that I wanted to come back to this point. I was thinking about everything that we've talked about. You know, I really learned this actually through our work at Upbuild, but we're in an age where people talk about how their body is a temple, and how everything that we put in it, that you can be so careful because like this is the one body that we have. And you know, you see more and more people who are very conscious about how they're treating their bodies, which I think is great. It's so important. Thinking about our consciousness that way, where everything that I'm taking in is affecting who I am and how I show up, and my consciousness. And what would happen if we treated our consciousness like a temple? I think about this often when in regard to our kids. We have small kids, and so how they're influenced by so many things, and what they watch and what they see and who they're surrounded by. And I realize, like, I'm protecting their consciousness, but what am I doing for my own consciousness, which obviously affects their consciousness? So I think, you know, the practices of meditation, of solitude, you spoke about, sometimes you can think about it as a mirror that is, if it, you know, our kids in Montessori school learn to polish the mirror so that it's clean and clear, and so that you can see a proper reflection. And if we're not doing that work, we are doing ourselves and all the people around us a massive disservice. And so, yeah, I just really like the idea. I love the idea of, you know, my consciousness is a temple, and how can I honor that and be so vigilant about everything that I let into that consciousness. Powerful.
That is one of the things I most keep at heart with me day to day. And when I'm on retreat, again, I just do it more. Like I won't watch something that isn't directly related to my spiritual aspirations. I won't do things that will take me away from myself, but I will be really in an immersive experience. And I really try to curate that very carefully. Again, I try to do that anyway, day to day, but I just dial it up. I make it much more immersive and blocking out other influences. And this goes back to also the modes of material nature. Everything is governed by these energies that are playing on us, that make us want more, like passion, or that make us more self-absorbed and critical and destructive, self-destructive, destructive towards others. That's ignorance, and or goodness, which is the highest of the modes, which is what we want to experience, a selfless, caring, present, attentive state of being. And everything around us is governed by these modes. Anything we watch, anything we read, anytime we talk to somebody, any place we go to, the environment has this energy. And being conscious of that, I mean, Krishna spends so many chapters of the Bhagavad Gita speaking about this one thing, the modes of material nature and their influence on us. That's not a coincidence that he takes up so much airtime on this one thing, because, as you said, the body is a temple and the mind is a temple, and it's being overrun by influences that are not fit for a temple. And what happens if we become conscious of that and we reverse that? Then we start to take back the reins to ourselves.
Yeah, and you're talking about, you know, what you do on retreat and how vigilant you are. It strikes me that this is again something that is really difficult and painful in the beginning, and then over time something that you really start to look forward to. Not dissimilar from physical exercise, where in the beginning, like the idea of going to the gym or spending an hour, it's difficult and it's painful. And as you build that habit, it's something that you feel bad about not doing, and you feel like you don't feel good about yourself physically, mentally, emotionally. And I think the same is true even to a greater extent when we're talking about consciousness.
That's it. You know, when I am on retreat and I'm not exposed to these things, I am not missing them. It becomes the opposite now. And that was not always the case. In the beginning, I was missing everything, right? But now what happens is the opposite. When I'm exposed to influences or, you know, going based on my attractions to entertainment or distraction, diversion, you know, things that I know are not nourishing me. They're not actually anything to do with who I really am. I feel I'm missing out when I'm doing those things. So it really flips. And yeah, it's amazing. It's so, I mean, it has to be experienced. And by the way, I did exercise every day. That was another commitment, to take care of the body as well, better than I usually do, to get enough rest and exercise every single day, because the mind and body are temples that should be respected, like a vehicle is housing the self, or sorry, the, you know, like the car analogy that is often given in the sacred texts, that the person who's driving the car is the one that we want to be concerned about, not so much the car itself. But at the same time, for the person driving the car, you also take care of the car and you honor that this is going to get me to my destination. So in the spiritual journey, the mind and the body, they're going to get us to our destination. So we have to honor them. But the emphasis and how we do that, the prioritization should not be defeating the purpose, you know, mistaking who's the car and who's the driver.
Wonderful. So I'm trying to think of a final word to offer to our audience here about the temple, about the car and the driver, and just hoping that we all can treat our consciousness that way, that we have our attention on the driver of the vehicle, and that we can really honor how we invest in our consciousness, because that has immeasurable impact on ourselves and all of the people around us. So as an offering, we hope that this is beneficial for just framing how one thinks about their consciousness in their lives. Thank you both for this conversation.
Thank you
Thank
so
you
much.
guys.